It's the only thing new from me.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
That, and I found a new Mexican place down the street from me. Amazing fajitas.
I love it. Oh my god. That reminds me of one time I went to dinner with my brother and my brother's friends when he was in college, and we went to like a shitty like Applebee's type place, and I remember one of his friends called fajitas, and every time somebody says fajitas, I say fajitas.
Now I have to call them that.
So stupid. And I do believe that he did it on purpose. Like he did it as a goofy joke.
I was kind of... See, that's why I didn't even want to ask, because I didn't want to ruin it.
Honestly, my recollection, I think my adult brain was like, he had to have been joking. But at the time, I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Why did you
I feel like there's somebody out there in the world...
Yeah,
if they saw that written on a menu.
He was a weird guy too, because I remember him coming over the house once, and like he couldn't he couldn't find a glass, and instead of asking one of us like where the glasses are, he just found a bowl and he just like drank out of a bowl.
Man, is that autism?
Well, maybe I should consult the DSM. See if it meets the criteria.
Anytime I see like one of those videos, I send it to you. I'm like, does this qualify? What do you think of this? What is the...
You know what's even crazier about that? I can't even diagnose. So we both don't know.
Apparently.
Although I got a nose for it, I think, at this point.
You know a lot more than most people about it, so.
Yeah. There have been quite a few like MDs that I've like sent a message to being like, so... have you thought about it? Because it's a little, there's a couple things that I'm like,
it might positively impact your life to know.
Yeah. One of my nurse practitioner coworkers, shout out Sarah, she's my work bestie, was telling me that she gave a diagnosis to somebody this week, and they literally like yelled in excitement because they like got, it was like a relief to like know.
They're like, finally.
Yeah, I thought that was really nice.
Especially if they're an adult at all, because I just talked about that earlier today, any kind of adult assessment or... They're
older, you know.
Feels like it's almost impossible, or you have to just be so patient.
There's not a lot of adult providers around. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of, like, people are... Should we do the intro? Yeah.
Perfect timing.
Can we get sponsored by Olipop? That would be so fucking sick.
Dreams.
We would have
too much fiber. I'll be fiber.
Olipop is Chris Apple is no longer a seasonal flavor. It will be available year-round.
God bless. This is Trump's America. I have crisp apple all year round.
That's our intro.
My mood has changed significantly for the better. This is Friends Living Well. We're a podcast.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because we don't know what time it is because it's dark and it's Alaska. This is Friends Living Well.
That was a great intro. Friends Living Well. We're a podcast about therapy and friendship from two therapists.
And that made me emotional.
Wow, that's nice. We really haven't seen each other in a long time. That made Nikita emotional. This disclaimer.
Full disclaimer,
despite the image of the DSM that is to my right, we're not diagnosticians. We can't give you a diagnosis. This is also not therapy. If you need therapeutic, informal. Yeah, if you need therapeutic supports, don't listen to a podcast. Send us a message at fulllivingwellness.com if you need to be connected to resources.
Oh, that's a good idea. We should, yeah.
Yeah. Click the link below. Okay, so what we decided is we're going to do like a multiple part.
There's so many things we want to talk about.
Yeah.
we have a long list going. It was really hard looking at it to even go, where do we start? And then there were so many complex ones.
When you sent me that list of things you wanted to talk about, I looked at that list and it was basically, I looked at it and said, this is in another language. These are all such general topics that I don't know where to go.
Just my mind.
And then Nikita then sends me like a 3-page document 12 hours later that's like, this is everything I want to talk about. And it's like title, concept, referenced article. And I'm like, how are you? I don't understand how that brain lives in your skull. So we're going to do multiple part episodes.
I'm so excited for it. She's busy in here. She's been thinking of stuff.
She's busy. Yeah. A series, if you will.
For you.
Yeah, a series of episodes with kind of like common themes and threads.
Yes.
I think we kind of want to make it also like seasonal for you guys. So like when it's coming out and you're listening to it, hoping that it will be relevant for the time in which you're listening to it. So today we're going to talk about anxiety and depression, right?
So cute.
Yeah. Oh my God, anxiety and depression is so cute.
My favorite version of you.
Tom does it so much, and now I hate doing it because Tom ruined it. Love you, buddy. I've been a monster today, and I really need to chill out. Yeah, so we're going to talk about anxiety and depression. I think it's relevant and a great topic that you brought up is because it's 5:44 when we're recording this, and it is pitch black outside.
Right.
Which sucks for everybody.
And everybody feels it in different ways. Some people like it. Some people benefit from this time of year and more of this timing of things for them. But other people really, really struggle. And they also anticipate very much struggling during this time of year.
Yeah, besides obvious weather patterns and darkness, it's also a time of year that is very focused on tradition and family and Dennis being cute.
So cute.
And togetherness. And that's really challenging for a lot of people.
And finances and expectations.
God, yes. Yeah. So there's a lot. There's a lot. I personally am already sensitive to it. Just, I think routine wise, right? Like it gets darker. It gets harder for me to kind of live the routine that I'm used to. And if my routine falls apart, you don't want to be around me. So
you do well with your routine.
Yeah.
And checking off your boxes, you're very like, okay, I did that thing. I'm done with that. Now I can move on to the next thing.
I made my day miserable today. And you want to know why? And it was really for fucking dumb. It was really stupid. So
why you gotta do these things?
Mind you, I really had an extremely light workload today. The only 3 things that I had to do today was drop off my car at the car place, pick up the dog, go to the vet, come back, do the podcast.
Not bad.
Why was I like an anxious mess all day? Because it just felt like I had so much to do in a particular time frame. Like car was at 1:30, vet was at 3. Vet is 40 minutes away from car place. That I just was like, I ruined my whole day.
Was it because everything is almost back to back, so you're not really getting...
And it felt like I didn't actually rest or have a break today because I woke up late. I then had to get ready. Then we went to the Buttery, which again is a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
But it just felt like work. It was stupid. I just was...
No, I get it.
I don't know why.
Well, and this is my assumption, so I mean, you tell me what it means for you, but...
Your assumption?
My assumption. You want to be home or doing something else instead. They're all good things to do, but you know when you're just not in the mood to do those kinds of things, or you don't have the capacity, doesn't matter if they're good things.
And I have like something to do tomorrow that's minimal. I'm actually being a part of my friend's podcast.
Check you out.
Yeah. I want to say it's Under the Wire. I'll look at it.
Yeah.
Jess Goldie's podcast. Yeah.
Nice.
So I'm doing that tomorrow, and then I'm getting brunch with my cousin on Sunday. So but again, it's like stuff when I'm not normally doing stuff. And that just is forking me up, man.
It's a big deal. Speaking of that rest thing, that unplug thing that we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Kelsey already knows this because it's one of my favorite little grounding pieces. But when I was in school, I was studying a lot of anthropology stuff, which is basically just watching documentaries of other people that old white men found and like
so true.
Put a camera there. So but one that was really good was a culture that hadn't had any modern technology yet. And so at sunup, obviously everybody would get up, had their whole routine and would go to things. But then as soon as like the sun would start to go down, it was almost like somebody like rang a bell or something. Like you would just see like the shift in light cued something for everybody. And then when the sun went down, it was like, you know, you would see some fires going and it just got quiet and there was like music playing and people talking. And it just really kind of settled on me of like, oh, we used to, when the sun went down, we actually stopped doing things.
Yeah.
And there was no picking up your phone or let me get on the laptop and do more work or even like let me clean or work on this thing. Like it's dark. You can't see. You just. Yeah. Right.
But that's what like community used to look like, you know, in those ages of like sun goes down, we sit around a fire, we tell stories and we sing songs. Right?
Yes.
Which sounds so nice. And that's where you saying that to me was such a nice like reframe for me shifting into the winter season, because I'm like, why am I fighting my body's like natural processes? Like there's a reason I feel tired. It's not because I'm doing something wrong.
Absolutely.
It's because like my body is like, oh, this is what makes sense with my circadian rhythm.
Heck yeah. Don't even get me started on like hormones and that's in no way my expertise, but
yeah,
just female bodies, hormone needs, how that is impacted by the sun because all of that cues your circadian rhythm. So
yeah, I saw a video on TikTok the other day that was saying, and I would love to actually look at the research for this, but they said that their mom, anytime that they're sick, makes them sit outside in the sun for 10 minutes a day, like all bundled up, even if it's cold. And that like drastically improves health outcomes.
Yeah. The vitamin D.
Sunlight.
Yeah. So that I was like, oh shit, like that's really smart, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that that's a really relevant topic for everybody because everybody has a hard time shifting into, you know, this different time of year. There's a lot of stressors in this year. So we thought it would be helpful to talk about it because we also got some questions. You know, I don't know if you got to take a look at the questions that were in there. I think I do think it's relevant to the topic. I don't know if you wanted to talk about it now, but I think it's a nice segue because a lot of people and Larry submitted a really fucking dumb
shout out Larry.
He did like it was really funny. But I was like, wait a second. Let me pull it up really quick. I should have done this before I was talking into a microphone.
Just all day long in my head.
God. Yo, that song is so lit. Tell me you listen to that song and you don't have like a physical response.
I feel like a king when that song comes on.
I think Larry submitted a question because I said like, what are your questions about anxiety, depression? Larry goes, how come every time I get super anxious I start pissing out of my ass? And I said, somatic symptoms, you say. And because another person said, the first thing I do is stop eating when I'm anxious. It's like my body isn't hungry.
Stress response.
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting. And Ashley put in a good question of like, how do anxiety and depression manifest differently in the body? So there was like a lot of, I think, very like somatic type
Love that.
questions when it came to anxiety and depression. So I think that would be interesting to talk about.
I almost wonder if we should start with that last one first because it feels like it even gets into the topic of what anxiety and depression, just like anything else right now, are words that are just thrown around, and it's very easy to actually forget what do these words mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good. I think it would be good, and that's why we cracked out the DSM here, because
Just in case.
Because I thought it could be helpful to like read what a diagnostician or like an MD or whoever is like, be like, oh, you have this, this, and this. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's depression. So that I thought could be a good like starting place, perhaps.
Good question.
Yeah.
How do you explain the DSM to other people?
Oh.
I get asked that question every once in a while. People will ask, what is the DSM?
Well, I tell them what the acronym stands for always.
So that way they know that we know. We're no dummies around here, okay?
I don't know why I feel like that's important, but I feel like there's so many acronyms in what we do that, like, in order to define something, I need to tell you what are all of its parts. So I start with like,
You're so structured and cute. Just cute as a button.
Yeah, so I call it I don't call it. It is called.
One day I decided that I would just call her
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Y'all already know how I feel about the word disorder, so I'm not going to get into that today because I've already gotten into it before. I describe it with that, and then I basically say it is a kind of like a guiding protocol type thing that describes a cluster of symptoms.
There we go.
That may or may not encompass how you're thinking and feeling.
I like this. May or may not.
Right? Because it might and it might not. And it's like very rigid criteria. So that's like a couple of the things, like those are some like hot words I would throw in there.
Yeah.
Because I like to stress for people, it is a book. It describes a cluster of symptoms. Like, you can't describe a person and their experiences
Very true.
into just like a cluster of symptoms.
And there's so much crossover. That's what I think the first thing when you get into it, you're like, oh, I have this, and I have this, and I have this, and I have 2 of these, and I have 4 of these. So what the heck do I have? What would you actually diagnose me with? It's not so easy.
No, and I think the reason why I think it's good to talk about like what does it mean is because the average layperson is throwing around terms like trauma, OCD, depression, like suicidality, like all these things.
Yes.
Dennis, lay down. Go lay down.
Oh, that's a good boy, Dennis.
Yeah. That was a fucking little commercial break right there. I don't even remember what I was saying. But yeah, it can describe some things.
Some things it can.
Some things it can describe.
No, I think you're onto something there. I mean, you named a lot of what I would say it is too. I always use the word organization. That's like all it is to me. It's just describing human behavior and human emotions. It don't get more. That's what I'm. Yeah. It don't get more complex than that. And so all the DSM is trying to do is say, what are some labels we can put on things, and can we draw some nice color coded maps so we can try to make sense of some stuff? And are there enough themes and patterns, which is usually when something becomes a diagnosis. We're like, okay, we've seen this pattern throughout hundreds, thousands of people in different scenarios. We feel pretty confident saying there's something going on with this cluster of symptoms or how this is. But it's no science. It's no like, here is the answer to all things and all mental health. And
that's the word you were going to say is the word I was going to point out, which is pattern. I think pattern is a really important feature. The other thing that I like, that I think is a word that I hang on to a lot, and I use it a lot in parent trainings. Yeah. They tend to use the word pervasive a lot, which I think to me is when the average layperson is like, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, that to me is like the defining characteristic that sends you over the line into an actual diagnosis versus what they would describe as like having like developmentally normative fear, anxiety, right? Because everybody experiences fear and anxiety throughout different points, but to me it's how pervasive is it? How is it is it impacting your ability to function on multiple levels in different capacities
and preventing you from living how you would like to be living.
Exactly. So that's where I think it's like, it's all cute and fun, and I love that everybody's talking about mental health now, as they should. I think it's normalizing it for a lot of people and their experiences, but it is also important to understand that, like, there are people that have clinical depression.
Well, that's because what you're talking about, I always distinguish that as features. Mm-hmm. We all are going to display features of probably just about every...
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
Diagnosis that's in there at one point or another, or one situation at another. And feature just means like one of the symptoms. So yes, fear is one of the symptoms that's listed in anxiety, is experiencing fear in that way. So every human being that lives, if they're conscious, is going to experience fear. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to meet the criteria where it's going to be so severe that it negatively impacts your ability to live, that then it requires a diagnosis.
Yeah
And that is definitely something that not a lot of people...
And it's interesting. I don't think I've ever actually read an anxiety disorder like description in this DSM, because I've only looked at it for like very specific things.
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting because it says in here, you know, fear and anxiety are two different states. They often overlap, but fear more often associated with surges of autonomic arousal necessary for fight or flight, thoughts of immediate danger, escape behaviors. Anxiety is more often associated with muscle tension, vigilance, cautiousness. So it's interesting that they're like, but those would be like the features that people would be looking for, right? So you're having a conversation with your PCP or like whoever, and if you're describing these things, they're like categorizing them in their head based off of this and saying like, oh, that sounds like you're describing this thing. And oftentimes too, and I'll have to, like, in the end of here, like, this is the other end of things, which is the depressive disorders. It talks like mild, moderate, severe.
Yes.
So that's another thing too that is like often categorized by clinicians is,
and part of your diagnoses if you're going to get one.
Yeah. I don't feel like everybody uses mild, moderate, severe, though. I know with certain diagnoses, like, people tend to do that with autism. They tend to give it like levels.
The only time that I notice that I do is for all of my intakes when they come in, or if I'm doing treatment plan updates, I'll oftentimes give a GAD assessment. So the GAD-7, which is, you've probably done that at your primary care doctor at one point or another, or the PHQ-9, which is probably even more common, which is for depression. And on there, when you score that, I'll put a severity level, because each bracket has a range of, specifically in the past 2 weeks. That's how they like to, not only the diagnosis, that's another thing that usually catches people, is a lot of these anxiety and depressive disorders only even have qualifying features that are needed for 2 weeks, and then you can become diagnosed with something, which is...
Yeah, but I think that depending, like, especially with like the different I've read this like in bipolar disorders, that is a significant distinguishing factor, is the amount of time their experience manic or depressive episodes. So there's a lot of stuff going on,
a lot of complexities, lots of details,
and I think it's important for people to understand the difference between the two. But I think it's nice to normalize it, right? Like, everybody experiences features of anxiety and depression. And so...
Speaking of which, why don't you go through and read a little bit about what does the DSM say are the features of, at least...
little story time.
Just a little.
With my DSM. It's so cute.
And speaking of which, somebody that I want to recommend myself, I actually sent you the video. I was so glad it was still on YouTube, because you know how YouTube every once in a while deletes one of your videos that's in your playlist, especially if it's an old one. I was so afraid that's going to happen. And that Andrew Solomon TED Talk, I had watched that in grad school. It was either undergraduate or grad school, and I found that to be so helpful. And he has a number of books that are written about depression, and I have found that to be very resonating for myself or anybody else that's experiencing depression, to have somebody talk about what it feels like as an experience.
I really love TED Talks for that reason. like, you get to hear from very highly educated people with amazing experiences and learn so much
that you otherwise maybe would not get introduced to.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a long neck boy.
I know, he breaking a neck for me. He always does this. Well, so the reason why I'm paging through this is because under anxiety disorders, there is so many disorders. And there's like, I think I could, so maybe I could read some of, like maybe the social anxiety disorders, because I think that would be relevant. Or I could do generalized anxiety.
Well, and let me, I have like a little short list here that I'll maybe go through too. So for depression, just to cover real basic stuff, a mood disorder characterized by persistent feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and a lack of interest or pleasure in daily activities. So low mood, low interest, fatigue, low energy, sleep disturbances like insomnia and excessive sleep, changes in appetite or weight, difficulty concentrating or making decisions, feelings of worthlessness or guilt, thoughts of death or suicide in more severe cases, which definitely, especially when you're living with this more and more, that hopelessness sets in. Like, how many times am I going to go through this? How long is this episode going to last for? What's working? Why won't it work?
Yeah.
All of these questions come into play. And I wrote out a couple of quotes from Andrew Solomon too that I can.
Yeah, that you maybe you want to sprinkle them in as we talk about some more stuff. Things.
Yeah. Well,
that gave me some time to kind of just read some of this criteria. I'm just looking at generalized anxiety disorders. It's what's so interesting is, like, we talked about patterns, traits, things like that, right? This is so subjective. Like, as I'm just looking at it, I'm like, this is so subjective, right? So one of the criteria is excessive anxiety and worry occurring more days than not for at least 6 months about a number of events or activities. The individual finds difficult to control the worry. The anxiety and worry are associated with 3 or more of the following symptoms: restlessness, easily fatigued, difficulty concentrating, irritability, muscle tension, sleep disturbance. That's only half of the criteria. The anxiety, worry cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. If I were to have a highlighter, I would be like, that part. The disturbance is not attributable to physiological effects of a substance or another medical condition. Super interesting. If somebody presents with anxiety but has hyperthyroidism,
there's going to be a medical aspect of that that's going to cause especially somatic features.
But do you not get a diagnosis and treatment just because you have a medical condition that might be increasing your anxiety?
Right. And even if you do, you still need treatment for it, right? You still need those same resources and outlet, regardless if it's a medical condition or...
I think the reason they're putting that in there is because to basically be like, hey, clinician, check off medical first.
Yeah.
Which is usually like one of the first questions I'm asking with a parent that has a kid that's like engaging in self-injury.
Medical rule out of things.
There you go. Right. And the last thing is the disturbance is not better explained by another mental disorder, contamination, or other obsessions in obsessive compulsive disorder. So they're basically like listing out like all the other anxiety disorders stuff here.
What do I have too?
So that's really, I think that's really interesting, but I think the thing I would highlight there would be like clinically significant distress and impairment in lots of important areas of functioning. If you're experiencing that for more days than not for at least 6 months, maybe you should talk to your doctor.
Everybody's like, okay, everybody make an appointment right now.
Everybody's just smashing their fucking keyboards, just like, yeah. Again,
they make it sound so simple in these definitions too. It's so
because this is something we've talked about. People might not even realize that the things that they're doing and saying are the presence of anxiety or like somatic features.
Totally.
Because if you don't have the self-awareness,
and if you don't think of it that way, if you just assume that it's normal, or you don't necessarily label it that way or want to.
Yeah. So interesting. Sorry, I totally cut you off, but I just ran with a thought.
That was cute.
I ran with a thought.
There's this other part of notes that I have here that you might find particularly interesting.
Tom, you look like you're gonna fall asleep, buddy.
So how would you think that they're similar?
Anxiety and depression?
Yeah.
I think that they, based on what I just read, would be
No right or wrong answers.
similar in a way of like impairment in functioning. I think that also some of the somatic features or some of the behaviors associated with clinical significance would be similar. Like,
Totally.
is it excessive worry? Is it fear? Because that was their distinguishing factor, is like fear and anxiety are different. So they're saying in here, so that to me would be like, is it fear? Is it anxiety? That would send me maybe in a different path.
See, and this is what's so interesting, because when I did a little bit of just looking at things, to one of the definitions that I pulled that I really liked about where are they different or how do they different, it says depression is primarily characterized by persistent sadness and loss of interest in life, while anxiety revolves around excessive worry or fear.
That's such a good way to reframe it. That makes so much sense. It makes so much sense because this is why I'm not a depressed person. I'm an anxious person because I'm always having obsessive thoughts. Repetitive. Like I just described it today.
Yeah.
I ruined my own fucking day.
Right? And even like, see, even that persistent sadness, like we all think we know what that word sadness means, but that can be so, that's like when you wake up in the morning, are you like,
Yeah.
I have to
Live.
I have to be alive, and I have to, or like when you go to feed yourself, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
look, I have to,
Nothing tastes good anymore.
nothing feels worth it.
Yeah.
Just exhausting,
Yeah.
monotonous.
Yeah. I think that that's a good distinguishing factor between the two. Like, and this is like how I like to think of it sometimes too, is like one is almost like you're overactivated and the other one is like you're not activated enough.
So true. And to add to that, because I feel like this is a common one too, but anxiety, future oriented, depression, past.
Yeah, because all I did was ruin my whole day today because I was thinking about what is the next thing I have to do.
Not the present.
Correct.
Which is the only thing in between those two, so. Bada bing, bada boom.
That was deep. I woke up in a new Bugatti.
Bugatti. Yeah.
Yeah, so that I think that is a really interesting distinction that probably people don't take the time to think about unless you're us or other therapists and clinicians.
Can I expand on that even as you say that?
Expand, baby.
Expand, baby.
Dude, I wish we were eating chips right now. It feels like we're having like a fun girly hangout, but like we're talking about really heavy stuff. I love
Remember
it.
French onion dip in New Orleans? Remember Lauren's French onion dip?
That girl knows how to snack.
She know how to live.
She is a snack, and she knows how to snack.
Hey, girl, hey.
Yeah. Damn.
All right, so what because
That was a lot.
that was a lot, and I might have a little bit of an appetite going, but
I got 2 bags of chips on the fridge. They're just staring me down.
stare me down. Another part of depression that I really think of is existentialism.
That's your favorite fucking word.
It's my favorite fucking concept of things. I don't think you can. I think that's what like depression and existentialism go so hand in hand to me, because it's all of these thoughts about why am I here? What's my purpose? Do I even have value? What even makes me? Why am I always failing at things? Like it's all of this awareness of self.
Yeah.
And focus on self and these grander, bigger questions. And I feel like that's
have
such a
plagued us throughout existence. I feel like all like famous artists and creatives are all depressed because they're all like weighed down by all those questions
right.
you just asked.
Remember all those Greek dudes?
Yeah, they were like, why?
They just sat with robes on, probably
they're
because they
just
were
like-
cold with just those robes on all day.
Yeah,
but
they were like, why am I so cold?
my needs.
Why
are
am
so
I here?
needs.
And why am I cold? And why is his dong hanging out in his room?
They were hoping that was the answer. They were like, maybe if it's just free, that'll solve everything.
Oh my God. It's really interesting though, because I also, to tie back to your idea of like depression and loss of interest, when I'm consulting with a family, sometimes they'll tell me that their child like no longer likes something anymore. And there have been times in which like the motivation and lack of interest is so significant that I've had to ask the parent, like, do you think that they experience like a traumatic event or something like that? Because I think it would be interesting, and I should have maybe done research on this because this is like my area of specialty, but like, depression and anxiety rates around autistic people and neurodivergent people.
Absolutely.
Because I just saw a statistic today posted by one of my friends who has her own ABA agency, and I think it was about rates of trauma amongst autistic people.
Interesting.
Research shows that 32 to 60% of autistic individuals experience PTSD compared to just 4% of the general population. So I would wonder, and I know that this is like trauma is a totally separate. It is and it isn't. There's a lot of overlapping things here.
There's so many things there. And even as you're saying that, it's reminding me, I have a really big gripe as a therapist with treating depression. And I would imagine, especially hearing that it would probably mean the same thing for you too. Like when people ask me like, how do you treat depression? Or like, what's your treatment modality for depression? I can't do brain scans on people. Like, we don't live in a world. If you ask me, Nikita, what is the best way? One of the first things I would do medically is I would absolutely want to do a brain scan. And I would know any kind of brain damage, any kind of lesion marks, anything like that. Because they're, especially in anybody that has persistent or severe depression symptoms, or like you're saying about like a sudden change, I would imagine, I wish I had more research, and I know that there's a lot of other research that shows it, it's just not as focused as I'd like it to be, that shows that there's oftentimes some kind of brain damage that has happened.
Interesting.
And how that relates back to mood and changes in personality and even a sense of self that comes to that. And so especially as we're talking about more mild or moderate levels of some of these depression symptoms, and then we go into more severe. When I say severe, I mean individuals that I work with that have gone 2, 5, 10 years in depressive episodes.
Yeah, it's like I've heard the term treatment resistant depression. So they've done the EMDR, they've done all inpatient, they've done outpatient, they've been on meds since they were 14, and they're still impacted in socially significant ways in tons of areas. And that's where I've also heard, I don't know what you know about like ketamine therapy,
yes,
but that seems to be kind of like this emerging treatment that a lot of people are using, which also then makes me want to go like, let's talk about like psychedelic drugs and treatment of anxiety and depression, because I know that there's research on that.
We might have to have a follow-up episode to this, because it's probably just so important to get that information out there, because you're exactly right. Like the whole reason why, if somebody has brain damage in that way, they need to have stimuli provided to their brain that allows growth and development. There's so many treatments that you would then be able to focus on, especially if you knew what area of the brain was affected.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And all of these kinds of new treatments, I mean, psychedelics in general, ketamine, the idea behind them is that they activate parts of the brain that we're hoping will kind of create new ski ruts, so to say. Of
more neural pathways, perhaps.
Exactly.
And that's what's funny about, like, when you said, like, if somebody asks me how do I treat depression, I mean, I don't treat depression because I'm a behavioral therapist that specializes in other things. I'm sure that I could learn how to, right?
And I'm sure behaviorally, one way or another, you're asked all the time to do exactly that, just in different words,
yeah,
different
it's like we're
focus.
not saying it's depression. We're saying it's this behavior because...
He's not doing this.
Yeah, because if it's behavior, then a BCBA has to be able to do it no matter what fucking behavior we're talking about. But I was thinking, like, support people, because, like, you talked about it on, like, a biological level with your brain, but I was thinking more in terms of, like, well, all the things that would probably help would be, like, diet, exercise, leaving the home, all these things that I have seen in some of my autistic patients that I'm like, they need in-home supports because they need a person to get them to go do the thing.
That will help them feel better.
Right? And so that's where, if I was asked that question, like, those are the first things that I go to is
Absolutely.
like, what are the behaviors you can engage in that may or may not impact your depression symptoms?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that even reminds me of, like, hospitalization, like, speaking of community and that level of care that's needed. I mean, sometimes hospitalization feels exactly as sterile as that is hospitalization, but ideally what it feels like is community, and it's people that help you get to the things that you need to get to so you can, and your brain does have an opportunity to feel better. Because how many times have we heard that story of somebody saying, I was ready to take my life, I was ready to end it, and then time happened, something happened, and I found myself in a different place in life, and I'm glad I didn't do that.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so we need to help one another get there.
Find those moments, those glimmers,
Yeah.
if you will. Because, and that's where it's like, not that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because I don't like that terminology, because I don't want it to be basically placing the blame on somebody that may or may not have a brain injury or, you know, the chemical imbalance or whatever, right? But when you are depressed and you're not able, for many different reasons, to engage in routines, socialization, all these other things, like, you're not going to contact those moments. And maybe even if you do, your motivation is so reduced, your interest is so reduced that it doesn't feel worth it, or you can't feel it. Yeah. So that is like, I think that that's really interesting that people really do point to those moments.
Absolutely. Especially because so much of that narrative, like, something I really struggle with, I get emotional when I think of it, because
I won't make eye contact.
it's people that I work with, when I think of what their depression feels like, it's them believing the narrative about themselves. Like, they believe whatever is said about them.
Yeah.
And so to have people to counter that.
Yeah, that's really heavy. I felt the heaviness in you saying that, because I had a moment, I hope I'm not trying to make it about me, but I had a moment that made me think of, where something didn't happen the way it maybe should have happened, and I believed, like, oh, it's because this. Like, I believed it, and I ended up being proven wrong. But it was the fact that I believed it
about
that
yourself.
Was so hurtful for me.
Was it something you believed about yourself?
No, it was a belief about other people. And what they may or may not have done for me to show up for me. I believed that it wasn't going to happen. That was like, that's a red flag.
Because they almost like rewrote it for you, that you had a negative expectation.
And I was wrong about the expectation, but it's the fact that I've had experiences with that led me to actually believe that it could happen. I was like, that's what's heavy about it.
That's so interesting.
That's what I realized. That's what made me so sad.
Yeah.
Was that.
Recognizing that you held that belief and expectation.
And I'm like, there's something wrong here. If I really wholeheartedly, if I like believed this in my heart of hearts, that this was like, that could have happened, or this is what this person was capable of, then like there's a problem.
And why am I here? Why am I?
You know, just existential nonsense. It's crap. Existentialism is crap. You bring that word up with me a lot and I hate it. So yeah, I think it's a topic that we can talk about hours, ages. But I think what's fun in how we want to present some of this information is we want to talk about generalities, and then we want to talk about maybe some things that could or could not be helpful for people who are experiencing anxiety and depression around the holidays, perhaps.
Yes. I know it's such a heavy time of year that comes with so much, speaking of expectations and
yeah. So I think in the next episode we will maybe talk about, like, I know you had brought up the sad lamps. So I would like to talk about if there's any evidence base for that. Are they effective?
It would be good to look into.
And we could also just talk about some of our personal experiences of like things that we've tried that we think work or help.
Right.
So I think that would be really good to dive into.
Feels like we're coming to a break.
Yeah, because it's been about 45 minutes.
Wow, it has. Okay.
So I want to keep it short and light.
Let's break and see where it takes us.
Let's break. Okay.